Welcome in to another episode of Security Sessions brought to you by Compyl. I'm your host, Dan Tagney, and today I have a great episode for you to listen in on. I brought in Alan Alford from Alford and Adams Consulting. You may also recognize him from the Cyber Ranch podcast. I also have Stash Brazuka, CEO and founder of Compyl. These guys together put on just a remarkable episode, dropping knowledge and experience time after time. I just stepped back and got out of the way. These are the two guys that the pros in this industry turn to when they need advice. This is not the kind of stuff that you're going to find just Googling or going to ChatGPT. You have to talk to people that have actually done the job, that have been in the shoes and have real life experience and knowledge to share. I hope you stick around and enjoy the show. This one did not disappoint. Thank you, Alan and Stas, for being here. 2024 is off to the races, and there is a increased scrutiny from boards and regulatory bodies on demanding clear insights when it comes to organizations and their security postures. Alan, what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the metrics you think about when it comes to a proper security program and measuring its effectiveness?
It's interesting. A lot of us talk about compliance, and you guys are obviously in the GRC space. I've done a lot of GRC. I got a soft spot in my heart for GRC for sure. And yet the C part, the compliance part, I always end up shoving down into the bottom right corner of my slide. If I'm presenting to the board and I'm presenting 2 or 3 slides, the compliance bit is just a little afterthought, like, oh, by the way, we got our SOC 2, we got our ISO, we got our... I like that stuff to be there. I want to prove up that we're doing the things and that external validation occurs. And we've got sales enablement, really, is what you're saying. We've got some amount of security that the outer world is validated or certified. All that's going on. That's my bottom right corner. What I try to focus on the top and the middle and the left is the stuff that a lot of CISOs neglect. Number one for me would have to be business objective alignment. Bottom line, the CEO has come up with some vision for the company. This is the year we're going to fill in the blank, expand into Europe, increase sales by X%, these kinds of goals and objectives. And this stuff tends to trickle down to the next level and the next level and the next level. And by the time you get departmental, you've got specific goals like sales says we've got to shorten sales cycles. Or marketing says we've got to get more SQLs out of our MQLs, or says, oh my God, we got to spin up a data center in Europe. All these kinds of things like that. I try to take those organizational level goals and work with the other leaders of the business and figure out, what do you have? What do you care about? What's on your plate? What's hot and heavy that you're being measured by? And how can security assist with that cause? And so I'll say things like, okay, oh, we're expanding into Europe. I better darn spin my GRC team up on a GDPR exercise. I better get with legal. I better if we have a chief privacy officer, get them engaged. If we don't, work with legal and be the chief privacy officer. Those kinds of things. We're trying to shorten sales cycles. Okay, let's talk about how security is a requirement in sales and sometimes maybe a slowdown in the sales cycle. Let's talk about how we can secure what we buy, ensure that it's secure when we buy it, or secure what we sell and ensure it's secure when we sell it. And either way, the CISO has got a role in both of those exercises, trying to shorten that duration. Meeting with the company CISO who's thinking about buying your stuff, for example, and just having a CISO to CISO conversations. Those kinds of, all those business objective goals, I try to make that the top center of any slide I'm presenting upstairs. Then there's security maturity, cybersecurity maturity. Everybody talks about CMMI, ITIL, COBIT. There's 1,000,001 maturity models out there. That's great. Pick one. I don't care. Just apply it consistently is my rule. And I'm a big believer in taking any of the standard frameworks, your CSF, your CIS, your whatever it might be, and overlaying a maturity model on top of those. In other words, CSF says thou shalt have a hardware asset inventory. Do thou have one, yay or nay? And I don't know why it's in Old English, but the idea there would be, instead of saying yes or no, I've got it, on a scale of 0 to 5, how far along am I on my journey to having it? And I know that even in the back of the fine print on the back of the CSF standard, you can read this thing about, we do have this maturity standard. I think there's only 4 levels. And they say maturity doesn't replace a real program and da-da-da-da. Great. I still overlay maturity on the answers. I do it every time. I think it's far more meaningful than a binary yes, no. And I think it helps you isolate and track in where you need to focus, because you can break it up by identify, detect, protect, respond, recover, or protect, detect. You can do things like, let's say it's a CIS framework you're using. Not only can you break down by identify, protect, but you can break down by asset type. Is it data? Is it hardware? Is it et cetera? You can slice and dice and trend your stuff and figure out where your weak spots are in a security program by reporting these overall maturity score, but also broken down to that next level domain and category, but also by business unit. by whatever your breakdown is. Like maybe you've got one team in charge of the endpoints and another team in charge of the server. So you'd want to reflect endpoint estate versus server estate, something that simple. Maybe it's the giant data center in the US versus the giant data center in Europe. Compare those. Maybe it's satellite offices. Maybe it's business units. Maybe it's divisions. Getting into that comparative physics, because I love to create a competitive landscape for security within the company culture, right? Get somebody to say, oh man, he's
Gamify.
more secure than I am. I want to
Yeah.
fight for this.
Yeah. Gamify, right? Make
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, that's
Gamify
also
it.
what I like, and I think is really a commonplace that at least that I'm hearing with thought leaders in this space is just that clear alignment to business objectives when it comes to your security program. They don't stand alone. Stas, what I think about is that's it. I started thinking and I went blank. No, what I think about is translating this technical talk to non-technical people. How do you see, from a reporting standpoint, communicating an effective or ineffective piece of a security program to the board or to your executive team so they can now make decisions based on information that they know versus kind of nodding along and maybe not completely understanding what you're showing them?
For sure. And this is just going back to what Alan was saying as well. First off, I completely agree with the NIST CSF and then overlaying it with ITIL or CMMC, whatever whatever is more appropriate. That's the way that we do it. The trick, it's not really a trick, but the way the board just needs to understand what the risks are to the organization and be able to understand it in layman's terms. So being able to have, they're not going to care about operational risk. They want to see strategic risk and they want to know if it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction. And anything that needs to be resolved, they want to know how much and how long. Being able to explain to them in layman's terms about what the actual risk to the business is, and then getting their buy-in is all they're really looking for from a decision perspective. But it's hard to roll all of that information up because a lot of the time the maturity of an organization is quite low. So getting all that information to be able to make an informed decision is quite hard. And a lot of the time it's not repeatable. So it's a one-off exercise. And then trying to keep it consistent is very difficult. There's a lot of work before you're able to actually present that type of data to the board to make a decision, in my experience.
Sure. I've been in that seat before as the CISO, where my head of GRC basically did the following, and the chief of staff, right? We just reported to the board yesterday. Time to crank out the spreadsheets and start again so we can be ready in a quarter to report again. And it's all spreadsheet, PowerPoint, right? It's a pain. And I'm glad you said risk, because that's the other piece I put on my deck too, is the risk register. But to your point, strategic, not operational risk. It's a real fine line, depending on if you're reporting to the C-suite or the
Exactly.
board.
Yeah.
But you better have an understanding of the bigger risks the company faces that are business risks, not cyber
Yeah.
risks, business risks. You better
Yeah.
understand how your cyber risks tie to those risks. And you better understand when a cyber risk is a business risk and have that stuff ready to go right there, dead center in the middle of the slide. Risk. How are we addressing is the next slide. What are we doing about it? What's our plan and our program? Is it under control? Are we just, we have a
Yeah.
risk?
For sure. But it's a lot easier said than done. I've seen so many people in similar positions that are just not able to articulate to the business stakeholders what is going on from a security and compliance perspective, and they often don't get invited back, or when they do get invited back, it's for 15 minutes and it's way too high level and nothing really gets accomplished. It's a real delicate balance, and it's a hard skill set to achieve to be able to articulate
Yeah.
technical business risk to operational or strategic business risk.
Yep.
And what that makes me think of is just, I feel like automation is just, automation, AI, analytics. It's what's, I think, pushing into a lot of the new tools that are coming out. Alan, have you seen any automated reporting that's great? Do you think that the automated reporting has a role here in helping just bring consistency to some of the measurements that are being asked?
Absolutely, absolutely. The automation comes in play in several places. You have to think about the entire life cycle and burden of what we just discussed.
Mhm.
You've got the data gathering, you got the data harvesting from all the nooks and crannies and departments and all that. And then the aggregation and centralization,
Yeah.
then the charting, then the reporting, then the presentation layer, right? All of that. And there's an opportunity for automation at literally every one of those steps.
There-
I've seen some good stuff out there for
yeah.
sure.
But there's human error along the way of all of that as well, which is what my biggest issue with all of this is just the inconsistency of the reporting, because everything's manual and on spreadsheets and then combining all the spreadsheets together. And then even when you do that, like if they if there's like a question from management, it's really hard to actually pivot that data if they even know what data they're looking for, because a lot of the time when we're like we're the ones that are coming up with the KPIs and the stats anyways. And the business doesn't really, they might have some, they'll have a P&L statement. They'll want P&L information, obviously, but like from a security and compliance IT perspective, they're not really sure what they're asking for. And it's really hard to actually craft those KPIs that are meaningful to the business because they're all completely different depending on what that business is trying to do. That's been some of the challenges I've experienced in the past.
Yeah, full agreement. And the other tip I always have for CISOs is the odds are you're not the first CISO. Most of the time, you're a second or third or fourth CISO or whatever. You're not the first.
Yeah.
And even if you've got this brilliant model and method that you've perfected and you've gotten it to where it's not a full quarter's worth of spreadsheeting and PowerPointing and all the crunching and nastiness, and you've got your metrics and your KPIs, your presentation layer, you are ready to rock. First thing you do when you walk in the door day one is ask for the last presentation the last CISO did.
Yeah.
Because even if it's dumb, dorky, backwards, and weird compared to your method, it's what the board is used to.
Exactly.
And you have to make sure there's a continuity and a thread quarter over quarter, even with a change of CISOs. You can't just abruptly shift to an entire different presentation. You have to acknowledge what came before.
Oh, for sure. The amount of times that I've walked into this position and when there might have been a deck from a year ago, but then it's also, okay, can I see the policies? And then they give you the PDFs and you're like, where are the word versions of these? No one has any idea. And then I get an architectural diagram of the organization. No, like, or where's the SDLC? Like, depending on what the business does, but it's just wild, even still in 2024, how much of the basics and fundamentals are still missing in a lot of these organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, sorry about that. Alan, I'm curious if you can think of an example where a KPI or something that you were involved with measuring in security that then got affected the decision making from a board level or maybe the executive team, a direction that they decided to go in.
Sure. I've gotten back to the gamification. I've gotten the executive team to bark some orders at some people. I've seen that happen more than once. And that's always a delight when you can see the real security posture of the entire breadth of the organization and see the laggard get called out as, dude, you got to up your game. Great. I love to see that. And I don't want anybody punished or belittled or shamed or whatever, but definitely if you're the last one in the pack, you should know it. And you should have a plan to not be next time. And I want that competition, that fierce competition where you get to a point where there's always, of course, going to be a last one in the pack, but their delta is 0.0005x from the one in front of them. That's where you want to get it to, where you elevate the baseline across the board. I've seen that in plenty of circumstances. As far as the board goes, there's this trope, there's this myth that CISOs go to the board and ask for money. You hear this all the time. I went to the board and asked for money. You don't ask the board for money. You ask the CEO for money. The board is there to govern, not to manage, not to be operational. They don't have anything to do with budgets. Now, that being said, every now and again, the board is informed about monies have been allocated to this specific cause that we brought up in the last board meeting. I have actually been the disruptor and diverted those funds before. Last board meeting, when I wasn't even there, they decided that such and such was the big priority and the extra funds from the whatever fund were being allocated, and the board was being informed by the CEO that we've allocated our additional whatever surplus such and such funds to solve this problem. I came along with a big enough security issue to the CEO that we decided, you know what, we're going to focus on some security issues here. And we had to go back to the board and report, oh, what we said last quarter, because of this new security thing, we've actually diverted those funds to another project. Alan's here to explain.
You must have told a very good story. There was a very serious problem. It just probably
yeah. A little of both. Some from column A, some from column B.
Exactly. No, it's point taken. But yeah, that completely makes sense. Like one of the last place I was at, one of the cool things that we did is we had all the tasks in one place. So we had all the tasks for like HR, IT, risk, finance, whatever. And we can see all the tasks, and because they were set on a schedule, see which ones were falling behind and consistently falling behind, which departments had the most risk, but also the most stale risk that were not being updated. And phishing awareness training, like which ones are not doing it, which ones are not doing training at all. It was cool to see those stats and then actually report on it. And then when we were trying to get something when we were trying to articulate what the problems are with some of the departments are not playing ball, it was just a really easy data set to point to be able to get a few buttons pushed.
Yeah. I consulted for a company years ago that the CISO was a huge believer in the phishing training metrics and was a big believer in the negative aspect of it. If you click, you're busted approach. And it went all the way up to the CEO that if you got busted 3 times, if you clicked the bad thing 3 times, you were fired.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought that was so punitive and so counter to what we're really trying to do. Like my take on the phishing training is I focus on the positive. I want to know about the reporting metrics over the click rates. Because
Yeah,
click
for
rates,
sure.
I can guarantee you, I can train the whole company, get them all humming nicely, and then come up with a crafty enough one that I'm going to get a bunch of them to click anyway, every time. So I'm a big believer in the reporting metrics and being positive with that one. But I've seen that one go all the way to the CEO and be a
I've,
fireable offense. Like you want to
I've
talk
seen
about
that.
metrics that
Yeah,
change things for security.
yeah. I've seen that too, and also they work that into performance reviews, and
Yep.
yeah, so I've definitely seen that as well. But yeah, and phishing, it's still all the fundamentals that are being breached. Right? If you still look at it, like business email compromises, I think it's still like the number one way to get into an organization. So it's valid training, but they're getting more sophisticated. Software's getting more sophisticated, but a crafty email, I'm sure that you or I could write would definitely get
Oh
along
yeah.
for their targeted.
Yep.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you on that.
Yep. And there's another one I've seen that I found to be very positive. Security awareness training. Think about it as a CISO. Look back on your history as a cybersecurity leader and ask yourself how many times was the company's security awareness training completion at 100%?
We do this now as a business, so we do run this, and some of our customers do have that demand to have 100% security awareness training.
Okay.
It is pulling teeth. You're not going to get that on one go. It's 10 or 11,
Yep.
15 goes to get those last people to do it, and you're just chasing them to get it done.
Found a trick to solve that one.
Oh,
Found a
did
trick
you?
to solve that one. Another
I'm
company I
all
worked
ears.
for years
I'm all
ago,
ears. Yeah,
CEO again had to get involved. This is back
yeah,
to another story about
yeah,
metrics affecting all the way up at the
yeah.
CEO level. You don't get your bonus until you've completed. Period. Done.
That is a very good way of doing
Boom.
it.
We
Yeah.
got 100% overnight.
That is a great way of doing it. Yeah, well, good idea.
That's amazing. Alan, one more for you. I'm going to keep you on the hot seat. What are the best practices when it comes to benchmarking a security program against industry standards or competitors?
So it gets interesting in this one to me because generally speaking, your highest roll up is your maturity score, like CMMI, let's say, for example. And where are you getting your CMMI score? You're probably paying Big Fours coming in doing the audit. And then they tell you, here's your score, whatever, you get a 3.5.
Yeah,
And you compare to your industry, who's on average a 3.7. So you are
yeah,
below industry average.
yeah.
You are relying on that one Big Four entity to have had truly the breadth of your industry and to have talked to enough entities that do what you do
Mhm.
to have that be a worthy metric.
Yeah,
And every one of the big four is competing for the customers, and there's only so many who do what you do. So the odds are that that comparative metric is derived from a pretty limited data set. So what you want to find is
100%.
centralized areas and places where more data is available, right? So you get a tool like what you guys do, right? If you can get a bazillion companies all cranking through the same tool, your comparative physics are a lot more
Mhm.
accurate, period. And
For
it's way
sure.
better than going through Big Four.
For
So I'm a
sure.
big believer in an automated platform like what you guys do for solving that problem.
Oh, for sure. It's funny because I said CMMC before, and I'm not seeing CMMI. I just went through a
Right.
CMMC.
I do it all the time.
Anyways, but yeah, we get constantly asked for benchmarking data, and there's a couple companies out there that provide benchmarking data, but they don't source it. So everything you're saying is really on point. It's really hard to find those stats, especially on the verticals, but also on like then they want it broken down by revenue size,
Right.
by like industry revenue size, company size. Like it gets very specific. The big four they just don't have those stats. They're also not. I'm not going to bash on the big four, but like the organizational and discipline levels there are just they're just not there to be able to get.
Yeah.
To get
And,
the stats.
and they refuse to share with each other.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you had all Big Four compiling into one centralized
Yeah,
database about we got a CMMI score of X
yeah.
from this shop and one from that shop, and you could get enough data to actually have a meaningful comparative metric.
Oh, for
But that
sure.
would require cooperation between four entities
Yeah.
who are never going to cooperate ever.
No.
Stas, did you hear that? Compile the data together.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. But
Shameless plug.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, that's
Nice to
really
be found in the merch store.
that's really interesting though. Yeah. They also the amount of people that I know that have actually worked at all the big four as well
Yeah.
is really I find really interesting. But anyways, it's I completely agree with your previous point.
Yeah.
This is fun. Alan, Stas, thank you so much for jumping into the conversation. This was great. And I think the metrics part it's tough. It's tough to get your head, an organization wrapped around it. But when you're able to measure the effectiveness of anything within an organization, obviously you have the ability to then really make some great improvements, set some goals, achieve those goals, or at least see what you need to put in place to reach them. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And Alan, hopefully we can get you on another show in the future.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.